The lights in the research lab flickered as Dr. HFY adjusted the holographic display for the 1,000th time. The strange symbols hung in the air before him, glowing blue against the darkness of space visible through the station's massive windows. Each symbol seemed to mock him with its silence. Kepler Station was the pride of the Galactic Academic Consortium. Built at the edge of known space, it housed the galaxy's best minds. Scientists from dozens of worlds worked here, trying to solve the greatest mystery in the galaxy. But after 800 years of trying, they were no closer to an answer than when they started. The symbols were everywhere, carved into black stone walls on dead planets, etched into metal surfaces that refused to rust or age, written in light that never faded, even after millions of years. They called it the Eternal Script, and it was driving the galaxy's smartest people crazy. Dr. HFY ran one of his forehands through the crest of scales on his head. His people, the Altarians, were known for their patience and logic. They could think about a problem for centuries without getting frustrated. But even he was starting to feel the strain. His purple skin had grown pale from too many sleepless nights, and his large golden eyes were tired. "Show me the Rigel findings again," he said to his assistant, Dr. Cathera. The hologram changed, displaying new symbols found on a planet orbiting the bright star Rigel. These were different from the others, but somehow connected. They seemed to be instructions of some kind, with diagrams that looked almost like machine blueprints. "The carbon dating puts these at over 5 million years old," Cathera said. Her voice carried the musical quality of her species, the vegan songbirds. "But the metal they're carved into shouldn't exist. Our best metallurgists can't even identify what it's made of." HFY nodded. That was the problem with all the sites. The technology was beyond anything they understood. When researchers touched certain surfaces, ancient machines would hum to life. Lights would flash in patterns that seemed meaningful but made no sense. Computer screens would display moving images of star maps showing constellations that didn't match anything in their current sky. "What about the Proxima site?" HFY asked. Another image appeared. This one showed a vast underground chamber filled with what looked like weapons. Massive cannons pointed at the ceiling as if waiting to fire at something in space. The walls were covered with the script, more complex here than anywhere else. "Military analyst Thekmore believes it's some kind of fortress," Cathera said. "But built to fight what? And why were they all abandoned?" That was the biggest mystery of all. 17 different star systems, all containing ruins with the same script, all abandoned at roughly the same time. About 5 million years ago. Whatever civilization had built them had simply vanished, leaving behind only their mysterious writing and their incredible technology. Dr. HFY walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there were more ruins, more script, more questions without answers. The consortium had spent fortunes trying to decode the language. They had used every technique known to science: pattern recognition algorithms, quantum linguistic models, even time-dilated computer simulations that ran for subjective centuries in mere hours. Nothing worked. "The new translation team from Betelgeuse will arrive next week," Cathera said, trying to sound hopeful. "They've developed a new approach using crystalline matrix interpretation." HFY didn't reply. He had heard about new approaches before. The crystalline matrix interpretation would fail just like all the others. The script seemed to follow rules that didn't exist in any known language. It used concepts that had no translation, references to things that made no sense. Temporal warfare. That phrase appeared in dozens of locations, but what did it mean? How could time be used as a weapon? The best theoretical physicists in the galaxy had no idea. Dimensional fortresses, another common phrase. The word seemed to describe buildings that existed in multiple dimensions at once. Impossible according to current science. The final convergence. This phrase appeared most often near what looked like star charts, maps of the galaxy showing the movement of something vast and dark, approaching from beyond the rim of known space. But approaching when? 5 million years ago? Now? The script gave no indication of time in any way they could understand. HFY turned back to the hologram. The symbols seemed to shimmer in the artificial light as if they were alive. His team had cataloged over 10,000 different symbols. They had identified what might be verbs, nouns, and connecting words. They had found mathematical relationships and structural patterns. But the meaning remained locked away. "Doctor," Cathera said quietly, "the Consortium Council wants another progress report." HFY's scales darkened with irritation. The council met every few months to demand answers he didn't have. Politicians from across the galaxy asking why their tax money wasn't producing results. They didn't understand that some problems couldn't be solved by throwing more resources at them. "Tell them what we always tell them," he said. "We're making progress, but we need more time." It wasn't entirely a lie. They were making progress, just not the kind that led to answers. They understood the script structure better than ever before. They knew how the symbols related to each other. They could identify different types of writing, technical manuals, what might be poetry, historical records. But understanding structure wasn't the same as understanding meaning. The door to the lab slid open with a soft hiss. Dr. Vexhan entered, carrying a data pad and looking excited. Vexhan was young for a researcher, barely 200 years old, and he still believed every problem had a solution. "Dr. HFY, I think we should request human assistance," Vexhan said without preamble. The lab fell silent. HFY's golden eyes focused on the younger scientist. Humans had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. They were still considered newcomers by most species, barely civilized creatures who had spent most of their short history fighting each other. Humans? Cathara's musical voice carried a note of disbelief. "They've barely mastered interstellar travel." "But that's exactly why we should ask them," Vexhan said eagerly. "They think differently than we do. They see patterns we miss. Their brains work in ways that don't follow our logical processes." HFY considered this. Humans were certainly different. Their thought patterns were chaotic, unpredictable. They made intuitive leaps that often led to breakthrough discoveries. But they were also violent and emotional. Could such creatures really solve a puzzle that had stumped the galaxy's best minds for 8 centuries? "What makes you think they could succeed where we have failed?" HFY asked. Vexhan activated his data pad showing research on human cognitive abilities. They excel at pattern recognition, especially when the patterns are incomplete or partially hidden. Their military history shows they're excellent at breaking enemy codes and solving tactical puzzles under pressure. "Military history," Cathara repeated with distaste. "Humans are warriors, not scholars." "Maybe that's exactly what we need," Vexhan said. "Maybe we've been approaching this the wrong way. What if the script isn't academic writing? What if it's something else entirely?" HFY stared at the floating symbols. Could it be that simple? Had they been trying to read philosophy when they should have been reading something else? Something more practical, more immediate? "Submit a request to the consortium," HFY said finally. "Ask for human linguistic consultants. It can't hurt to try." As Vexhan hurried out to prepare the request, HFY turned back to the symbols. They seemed different now, somehow more urgent. As if they were trying to tell him something important. Something that couldn't wait much longer. Outside the station's windows, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that somewhere among them, sleeping machines were waiting for someone who could understand their purpose. Marcus Webb wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at the damaged power coupling with tired eyes. 67 years old and still crawling through maintenance shafts like a young man. His knees reminded him daily that those days were long gone. The corridor was too small for his frame, built for the slender Altarians who designed most of Kepler Station. But Webb had learned to squeeze into tight spaces during his military days. Some skills you never lost, no matter how much you wanted to forget where you learned them. He pulled out his sonic wrench and started working on the coupling. The work was simple, mechanical. It kept his hands busy and his mind from wandering to places it shouldn't go, places filled with smoke and screaming and the faces of friends who didn't make it home. Webb had been on Kepler Station for 3 years now. After his discharge from Earth's corporate wars, he had tried civilian life on Earth. But the crowds bothered him. The noise kept him awake. The way people looked at him when they learned he was a veteran made him feel like some kind of dangerous animal. So he had signed up for off-world work. Maintenance jobs on space stations paid well, and the isolation suited him fine. Most aliens didn't know enough about human military history to ask uncomfortable questions. They just saw another human worker, nothing special. The power coupling sparked as he removed the damaged section. He cursed under his breath and reached for a replacement part. As he worked, he could hear voices from the nearby research lab. Dr. HFY and his team working late again on their impossible puzzle. Webb had heard about their project, of course. Everyone on the station knew about the Eternal Script. the mystery that had stumped the galaxy's best minds for centuries. He had seen the symbols on maintenance displays throughout the station, used as screensavers and decorative elements. They looked familiar somehow, though he couldn't say why. The voices in the lab grew louder, more frustrated. Webb could understand most galactic languages after 3 years of working with aliens. The universal translator helped, but he had always been good with languages. Another skill from his military days when understanding the enemy could mean the difference between life and death. Nothing works, Dr. Cathara was saying. Every approach we try leads to the same dead end. The human linguists will arrive tomorrow, Dr. HFY replied. Perhaps they will see something we have missed. Webb paused in his work. Human linguists? That was news to him. Earth didn't have many citizens qualified for high-level galactic research. Most humans working off-world were like him, laborers, technicians, soldiers looking for a fresh start. Curiosity got the better of him. Webb finished installing the replacement coupling and made his way toward the lab. The door was partially open, and he could see the holographic display floating in the center of the room. Rows of glowing symbols arranged in complex patterns. He had seen those symbols before, not just on the station displays, but somewhere else, somewhere important. The mathematical relationships are clear, Dr. Vexhan was saying, pointing at a section of the display. But the conceptual framework makes no sense. Look at this sequence here. Webb stepped closer, trying to get a better view. The symbols were arranged in groups with connecting lines between them. Some kind of diagram or flowchart. But as he looked at it, his mind began making connections the researchers had missed. That looks like battlefield coordinates, he said without thinking. The lab fell silent. 3 alien heads turned toward the doorway where Webb stood in his maintenance coveralls, sonic wrench still in his hand. Dr. HFY's golden eyes widened in surprise. I'm sorry, Webb said, suddenly aware of how inappropriate his interruption was. I was just fixing the power coupling next door. I didn't mean to. What did you say about coordinates? Dr. HFY asked, his voice sharp with interest. Webb looked at the display again, more carefully this time. The memory was coming back now, clearer than it had been in years. The siege of New Sarajevo, when his engineering unit had been trapped behind enemy lines for 3 months. The way these symbols are arranged, he said slowly, it reminds me of tactical notation. Grid references for artillery strikes, supply drop zones, defensive positions. We used a similar system during the corporate wars. Dr. Cathara made a sound that might have been laughter. You think this ancient script is military notation? These inscriptions are millions of years old. I know how old they are, Webb said, stepping into the lab. But look at this section here. He pointed at a cluster of symbols connected by straight lines. Those look like range markers. And these over here, he indicated another group, could be elevation data for targeting systems. Dr. HFY moved closer to the display, studying the symbols Webb had indicated. Show me more, he said quietly. Webb walked around the hologram, seeing it from different angles. The pattern became clearer in his mind. This whole section looks like a firing solution. Range, bearing, target identification. And this part over here might be damage assessment after the strike. Impossible, Dr. Vexhan said. We've analyzed these symbols for decades. They show no correlation to military terminology in any known language. Because you're not looking at it like soldiers would, Webb said. You're trying to read it like academics. But what if whoever wrote this wasn't interested in philosophy or science? What if they were just trying to coordinate a battle? He pointed to another section of the display. Look at these recurring symbols. In tactical notation, you repeat key information to make sure it gets through. Unit identification, mission parameters, emergency protocols. The repetition isn't poetic or religious, it's practical. Dr. HFY was quiet for a long moment, studying the display with new eyes. You said you were an engineer during your wars? Combat engineer, Webb corrected. Demolitions, fortifications, battlefield communications. We had to read a lot of different notation systems. Friendly forces, enemy positions, civilian evacuation routes. After a while, you start seeing the common patterns, and you see those patterns here. Webb nodded. The structure is different, more complex. But the underlying logic is the same. Someone was trying to communicate tactical information quickly and clearly. No wasted words, no ambiguity. Just the facts needed to keep people alive and complete the mission. Dr. Cathara looked skeptical. Even if you're correct about the military nature of the script, how does that help us translate it? We still don't know what the individual symbols mean. Webb walked closer to the display, studying a section that looked like a status report. In battlefield communications, context is everything. You don't need to understand every word if you can figure out the situation. Is this an attack order? A defensive position? An evacuation plan? He pointed to a series of symbols that appeared multiple times throughout the text. These might be unit designations. These could be time codes. And these, he indicated a cluster of complex symbols, look like target priorities. You can read all that from these symbols? Dr. Vexhan asked. Not read exactly, Webb admitted. But I can make educated guesses based on the structure and context. It's like listening to radio chatter in a foreign language during combat. You might not understand the words, but you can figure out if your side is winning or losing. Dr. Zephi activated a recording system. Mr. Webb, would you be willing to work with us on this translation project? Your insights could be valuable. Webb hesitated. He wasn't a scholar or a linguist. He was just a maintenance worker trying to keep his head down and stay out of trouble. But something about the symbols called to him. They felt important, urgent, like a message that needed to be delivered. I can try, he said finally, but I'm not promising anything. I might be completely wrong about all of this. You might be, Dr. Zephi agreed, but you're seeing patterns we missed. That's more progress than we've made in decades. As Webb looked at the ancient symbols floating in the lab's artificial light, he felt a familiar tension in his chest, the same feeling he used to get before a mission, when lives depended on reading the situation correctly. These symbols weren't just academic curiosities. They were trying to tell him something important, something about a war fought long ago, against an enemy that might not be as dead as everyone thought. The question was, would anyone believe what the ancient warriors were trying to say? Webb stared at the holographic display, his coffee growing cold in his hands. 3 weeks had passed since he first walked into Dr. Zephi's lab. 3 weeks of working late into the station's artificial night, trying to decode messages left by warriors who had been dust for millions of years. The breakthrough had come gradually, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Once Webb started reading the script as military communications instead of academic texts, patterns emerged that the alien researchers had missed. This section here, he said, pointing to a cluster of symbols they had designated as Tech Sample 47 Alpha. It's not a philosophical meditation on time. It's a tactical report about temporal weapons. Dr. Zephi leaned forward, his golden eyes reflecting the blue glow of the hologram. Temporal weapons? That should be impossible. Should be, Webb agreed. But look at the structure. This symbol appears in every report dealing with heavy casualties. It's followed by these time markers, and then damage assessments. I think they were using weapons that could attack targets in the past or future. Dr. Cathera made a sound of disbelief. You're suggesting they could fight battles across time itself? Webb took a sip of his cold coffee and grimaced. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just reading what they wrote. And what they wrote says they were losing a war against something called the Devourers. That name had appeared in dozens of texts once Webb figured out how to identify proper nouns in the script. The Devourers, always written with the symbols for hunger and emptiness surrounding it. An enemy that consumed everything it touched. Show me the Rigel site translation again, Dr. Zephi said. The hologram shifted, displaying Webb's working translation of the text found carved into that impossibly strong metal. The words hung in the air, glowing softly against the darkness of space visible through the lab's windows. 9th Fleet reporting. Rigel defense grid operational. Enemy contact in 17 cycles. Recommend immediate evacuation of civilian populations from sectors 7 through 12. Devourer scout ships detected beyond the heliopause. Main fleet estimated arrival in 43 cycles. Webb paused, then continued reading. Status of dimensional fortresses. Fortress Alpha 7 operational but showing stress fractures. Fortress Beta 3 offline for repairs. Fortress Gamma 1 destroyed an enemy assault on cycle 15. The lab was quiet except for the hum of the station's life support systems. The alien researchers had grown used to these translations over the past weeks, but they still had trouble believing what they were hearing. Dimensional fortresses, Dr. Vexhan said quietly. Structures that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The engineering challenges alone would be impossible by our current understanding, Webb finished. But these people built them anyway. Had to, if they were going to have any chance against the Devourers. He pulled up another translation, this one from the Proxima site. The underground chamber filled with ancient weapons. This one's a technical manual. Instructions for something called a stellar disruptor. The text was dry, technical, written by someone who assumed the reader already understood the basic principles. But Webb had read enough military manuals to fill in the gaps. It's a weapon designed to destabilize stars, he said. Turn them into novas or collapse them into black holes. The ultimate scorched earth tactic. Dr. Kethara's crest feathers ruffled with distress. They would destroy entire solar systems? To stop the Devourers from consuming them, yes. Webb highlighted another section of the text. Look at this part. It's a calculation of acceptable losses. They were willing to sacrifice inhabited systems if it would slow the enemy advance. The moral implications of that decision hung in the air like a physical weight. These ancient warriors had faced a choice between genocide and extinction, and they had chosen genocide. Webb understood that choice in a way the alien researchers couldn't. He had made similar calculations during the corporate wars, trading lives for strategic advantage. There's more, he said, pulling up a series of connected texts from multiple sites. These are after-action reports from the final phase of the war. The story they told was one of desperation and failing hope. The Devourers had adapted to every weapon, every strategy. They learned from each defeat and came back stronger. The ancient civilization's greatest scientists had been working around the clock to develop new weapons, new tactics, new ways to buy time. This report talks about Project Convergence, Webb said. Some kind of last-ditch effort to stop the Devourers permanently. They were going to collapse multiple dimensions into a single point, creating what they called a reality anchor. A reality anchor? Dr. Zephi asked. Webb shook his head. I'm not sure about the technical details, but the tactical implications are clear. It was a suicide weapon. They planned to sacrifice themselves and take the Devourers with them. He pulled up the final text in the sequence, found carved into the walls of what had once been a command center. This is the last message, transmitted just before they activated Project Convergence. The translation was shorter than the others, but its meaning was unmistakable. To whoever finds this record, we have failed. The Devourers cannot be stopped by conventional means. Project Convergence will buy time, nothing more. They will return when the dimensional barriers weaken. We have prepared what defenses we can. The network will activate when someone speaks the command phrases. Use our knowledge. Learn from our mistakes. Do not let them consume everything. Webb finished reading and looked up at his alien colleagues. They stared back at him with expressions of shock and disbelief. They're coming back, Dr. Vexhan said quietly. The Devourers are coming back. Maybe, Webb said. This was written 5 million years ago. The dimensional barriers they mentioned might hold forever. Or they might already be failing. Dr. Zafhai stood and walked to the window looking out at the stars. If these translations are correct, those ruins we've been studying aren't archaeological sites. They're military installations, weapon caches and command centers waiting for someone to reactivate them. Webb nodded. That would explain why the technology still works after all this time. It wasn't built to last, it was built to wait. Wait for what? Dr. Kethara asked. For someone who could read their language and understand their warning. Webb stood and joined Dr. Zafhai at the window. Someone who could recognize military communications when they saw them. The implications were staggering. If Webb's translations were correct, then scattered across 17 star systems were ancient weapons and defensive installations, all waiting for activation. Technology that made current galactic civilization look like children playing with toys. We need to contact the consortium immediately, Dr. Zephi said, if there's even a chance that the Devourers might return. They won't believe us, Webb said. I'm just a maintenance worker with a theory. They'll want proof. Dr. Zephi turned back to the hologram. Then we'll give them proof. These command phrases you mentioned, do you know what they are? Webb pulled up one of the technical manuals, highlighting a section he had been avoiding. I think so. But speaking them might activate systems we don't understand. Could be dangerous. More dangerous than ignoring a warning about galaxy-consuming aliens? Webb considered this. During the corporate wars, he had learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was nothing at all. Sometimes you had to take risks to prevent greater disasters. All right, he said finally. But we should probably warn the station first. If these installations start powering up, people are going to notice. As Dr. Zephi began contacting the station commander, Webb looked back at the ancient symbols floating in the holographic display. For millions of years, they had waited patiently for someone who could read their warning, someone who understood that sometimes the greatest act of hope was preparing for war. The ancient warriors were speaking to him across the void of time and space, soldier to soldier. They had faced an impossible enemy and fought until their last breath. Now they were asking him to continue their fight. Webb had spent 3 years trying to forget he was a soldier. But some responsibilities transcended personal desires. Some wars never really ended. They just waited for the next person willing to pick up the weapon and stand the line. The question was, would the galaxy listen to what the dead warriors were trying to say? The consortium council meeting had not gone well. Webb stood in the center of the massive chamber, surrounded by representatives from dozens of worlds, all talking at once. Some demanded to see more proof. Others called for immediate military action. A few suggested that the ancient installations should be destroyed before they could cause any harm. "This is ridiculous," Senator Vaxon of the Centauri Republic was saying, his blue skin flushed with anger. "We're supposed to believe that a human maintenance worker has solved a puzzle that has stumped our best scientists for centuries?" Webb kept his expression neutral. He had dealt with politicians before during the corporate wars. They were the same everywhere, more concerned with their own importance than with actual facts. The translations speak for themselves. Dr. Zephi said from his position at the witness stand, "Mr. Webb has provided us with the first coherent interpretation of the eternal script. We cannot ignore what the texts are telling us." Stories about galaxy-consuming monsters and time weapons? Senator Cathari of the Vegan Combine laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Surely you don't expect us to take such fantasies seriously." Webb had been quiet for most of the meeting, letting Dr. Zephi present the evidence. But now he stepped forward. "Senator, with respect, these aren't fantasies. They're military reports written by people who were fighting for their lives. People who died 5 million years ago," Senator Vaxon replied. "Even if your translations are correct, which I doubt, what possible relevance could they have today?" Before Webb could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the council chamber. Emergency lights bathed the room in red as communication officers rushed to their stations. Through the chamber's massive viewing windows, Webb could see Kepler Station's defensive systems coming online. "What's happening?" demanded Council President Zor-An, a massive creature from the Heavy World systems. A young Altarian officer ran into the chamber, his scales pale with fear. "Mr. President, we're detecting massive energy signatures from all 17 ancient sites simultaneously. Something is activating the installations." Webb felt his stomach drop. He hadn't spoken any command phrases yet. Whatever was happening, it wasn't his doing. "Show us," President Zoran ordered. The chamber's main display activated, showing a map of the galaxy with pulsing red dots marking each ancient site. As they watched, energy readings spiked beyond anything in their records. Installations that had been dormant for millions of years were waking up. "The Rigel defense grid is powering up," the officer reported. "Energy output is already exceeding anything in our current technology. The Proxima Fortress is extending some kind of barrier around the entire system, and the Tau Ceti installation..." He paused, checking his readings. "The Tau Ceti installation is broadcasting a signal toward the galactic rim." Webb's blood ran cold. A signal toward the rim meant one thing. The installations were trying to detect something approaching from outside the galaxy. "Sir," another officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the Rigel system." "It's in the ancient script." Dr. Zephi looked at Webb. "Can you translate it?" Webb nodded, though his mouth was suddenly dry. "Put it on the main screen." The ancient symbols appeared in the air above the council chamber. Webb read them silently first, then translated aloud. "Warning. Dimensional barriers compromised. Enemy contact detected beyond galactic rim. Estimated arrival, 47 standard cycles. All defensive installations activating. Recommend immediate evacuation of non-essential personnel from outer systems." The chamber erupted in chaos. Senators shouted questions and accusations. Some demanded immediate military mobilization. Others called for surrender negotiations. A few simply sat in stunned silence. President Zoran's voice boomed over the noise. "Silence." When the chamber quieted, he turned to Webb. Mr. Webb, I need a straight answer. Are we facing an invasion? Webb looked at the energy readings from the ancient installations, then at the star map showing their defensive positions. The pattern was unmistakable, a perimeter defense designed to protect the entire galaxy. Yes, sir, he said simply. We are, by these devourers. That's what the installations believe. They wouldn't be activating unless they detected the specific energy signatures they were programmed to watch for. Senator Vaxon stood up, his voice shaking with anger. This is impossible. How can machines 5 million years old detect threats we can't see? Because they're not just machines, Webb replied. They're an integrated defense network designed by people who knew this enemy better than we do. They've been waiting and watching for 5 million years. Dr. HFY stepped forward. Mr. President, I recommend we take immediate action. If the installations are correct, we have less than 4 standard years before the enemy arrives. We need to study the ancient technology and prepare our own defenses. Study it? Senator Cathari's voice was high with panic. We barely understand our own technology. How can we hope to comprehend weapons that can destroy stars? Webb had been thinking the same thing. The ancient warriors had been far more advanced than current galactic civilization. Their weapons and tactics were beyond anything the current military could understand or use effectively. But they had left instructions. Technical manuals, tactical guides, training procedures, everything needed to operate their defensive network, if someone could read their language and understand their military mindset. I can help, Webb said quietly. The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to him, this aging human veteran who had stumbled into the greatest crisis in galactic history. The installations are designed to respond to human military thinking, he continued. That's why they activated when I started translating the texts. They recognize the thought patterns, the tactical approach. I can interface with their command systems. President Zoran leaned forward. Are you saying you can control these ancient weapons? Control might be too strong a word, Webb admitted. But I can communicate with them, understand their status reports, their tactical assessments, maybe coordinate their defensive operations. Senator Vaxon laughed bitterly. You want us to entrust our entire civilization's defense to a single human? A maintenance worker? Webb met his gaze steadily. Senator, right now I'm the only person in the galaxy who can read what these installations are trying to tell us. If you've got a better plan, I'm listening. The truth was harsh but undeniable. Without Webb's ability to translate the ancient script, the defensive installations were just mysterious machines. With his help, they became the galaxy's best hope for survival. President Zoran made his decision quickly. Mr. Webb, you're hereby appointed as Special Coordinator for Ancient Defensive Systems. Dr. HFY, you'll head the scientific support team. I want a full assessment of our defensive capabilities within 1 week. As the council meeting broke up into frantic planning sessions, Webb found himself looking out at the stars again. Somewhere beyond the galactic rim, an ancient enemy was approaching. The Devourers had returned, just as the ancient warriors had warned they would, but this time the galaxy wouldn't face them unprepared. The defensive network was active, and someone finally understood how to use it. Webb had spent 3 years trying to forget he was a soldier. Now he was about to become the galaxy's supreme military commander, fighting an enemy that consumed entire civilizations. The ancient warriors had passed their weapon to him across millions of years. Now it was his turn to stand the line. The question was, would their preparations be enough? Or would the galaxy join the ancient civilization in extinction? Another meal for the endless hunger that stalked the void between galaxies. Time would tell. But for now, Webb had work to do. Weapons to understand, defenses to coordinate, and an enemy to face. The war was beginning again. The command center on Kepler Station had been transformed. What was once Dr. HFY's research lab was now the nerve center for the galaxy's defense. Holographic displays showed the status of ancient installations across 17 star systems, energy readings, weapon configurations, defensive barriers, all monitored by the most advanced equipment the consortium could provide. Webb stood in the center of it all, feeling older than his 67 years. 2 years had passed since the installations first activated. 2 years of frantic preparation, of learning to operate weapons that could reshape reality itself. And now finally the enemy had arrived. Contact at Galactic Rim, reported Dr. Cathara from her sensor station. Multiple signatures, massive scale. The Rigel installation estimates over 3,000 vessels. Webb nodded grimly. The ancient texts had described devourer fleets of similar size. World ships the size of moons, factory vessels that could consume entire planets and turn them into more ships, scout fleets that moved ahead of the main force to identify targets. "What's the status of our fleet?" he asked. Commander Thexall, the consortium's best military officer, consulted his tactical display. 2,000 ships standing by at defensive positions. All major worlds have been evacuated to core systems. Civilian populations are as safe as we can make them. It wasn't enough. Webb knew it, and so did everyone else in the command center. The consortium fleet was impressive by galactic standards, but it was nothing compared to what the Devourers had brought. Their only real hope lay in the ancient defensive network. "Ancient installations report ready status," Dr. Zephi said from his position at the translation console. "All weapons charged, all defensive systems operational. They're waiting for your command." Webb looked at the tactical display showing the approaching enemy fleet. Red dots moving steadily toward the outer systems, leaving a trail of emptiness behind them. Long-range sensors showed planets going dark as the Devourers consumed everything in their path. "How long until they reach Rigel?" Webb asked. 18 hours, Commander Thexall replied. "The Rigel defense grid is our first line of defense. If it falls, he didn't need to finish. If Rigel fell, the enemy would have a clear path to the core systems." Billions of lives depended on weapons that no one truly understood, controlled by a human veteran who had learned everything he knew from ancient instruction manuals. Webb activated the command interface, feeling the familiar tingle as the ancient systems recognized his neural patterns. The installations had been designed to work with minds like his. Tactical, pragmatic, willing to make hard choices. Over the past 2 years, he had learned to think like the ancient warriors who built them. "All installations. This is Command Central," he said, speaking the activation phrases he had memorized from the ancient texts. "Enemy contact confirmed. Implement Defense Protocol 7. Across the galaxy, ancient machines that had slept for 5 million years roared to life. The Rigel defense grid extended its barriers, creating a wall of twisted space-time that would hopefully slow the enemy advance. The Proxima Fortress began charging its stellar disruptors. The Tau Ceti installation activated its dimensional anchors, preventing the Devourers from using their reality manipulation weapons. "First contact in 15 minutes, Dr. Cathara reported. Devourer scout ships are approaching the Rigel barrier." Webb watched the tactical display, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. This was the moment 5 million years in the making, the ancient warriors' final gambit, played out by their unlikely heir. "Contact," Commander Thexall announced. "Scout ships are engaging the barrier." The display showed energy readings that made no sense by conventional physics. The Devourer ships weren't just firing weapons. They were trying to eat the barrier itself to consume the very fabric of spacetime and add it to their mass. But the ancient engineers had planned for this. The barriers weren't just energy constructs. They were dimensional traps, designed to redirect the Devourer's consumption back onto themselves. "First wave destroyed," Dr. Cathara reported, her voice filled with amazement. The barriers held. A cheer went up in the command center, but Webb remained focused on the display. He had read the ancient tactical manuals. The first wave was always just a probe designed to test defenses and identify weaknesses. "Here comes the main force," he said quietly. The display erupted with new contacts. Hundreds of massive ships, each one larger than a consortium battleship. They moved in formations that hurt to look at, bending space around themselves as they approached the Rigel system. "All consortium ships, engage at maximum range," Commander Thexall ordered. "Try to thin their numbers before they reach the defense grid." The battle was unlike anything in recorded history. Consortium ships fired quantum torpedoes and plasma cannons at targets that seemed to absorb the energy and grow stronger. Devourer vessels responded with weapons that deleted matter from existence, creating voids in space that pulled in everything around them. But the ancient weapons were different. When the stellar disruptors fired, entire Devourer ships simply ceased to exist. When the dimensional fortresses activated their reality anchors, enemy vessels found themselves trapped in loops of causality, firing at targets that existed in the past while being destroyed in the future. "We're hurting them," Dr. Zephi said, monitoring the energy patterns. "But they're adapting, learning our tactics." Webb could see it too. The Devourers were changing their approach, finding ways to work around the ancient defenses. It was exactly what the historical records had described, an enemy that learned from every encounter. Rigel defense grid is under heavy assault, Dr. Cathera reported. Barrier integrity down to 60%. Webb made a decision that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. He activated the emergency protocols hidden in the deepest levels of the ancient command systems. All installations, implement final protocol, he said, speaking words that carried the weight of extinction. Authorization, Webb Marcus, Strategic Coordinator. Confirmed total war authorization. Across the galaxy, ancient weapons that had been held in reserve began powering up. Planet killers, starbreakers, devices that could collapse entire solar systems into quantum singularities. The ancient warriors' ultimate weapons created in desperation and left as a last resort. Marcus, are you certain? Dr. Zephi asked. Once we activate those systems, there's no going back. Webb looked at the tactical display, watching consortium ships dying under the Devourers' assault. Good people, brave people fighting against impossible odds, just like his friends during the corporate wars, just like the ancient warriors 5 million years ago. The alternative is extinction, he said simply. Activate all weapons. What followed could barely be called a battle. It was more like the death of space itself. Ancient weapons tore holes in reality, creating maze-like battlefields where cause and effect no longer applied. Devourer ships found themselves fighting their own future selves while being consumed by their past defeats. The stellar disruptors fired in sequence, turning 3 enemy world ships into expanding clouds of plasma. The dimensional fortresses folded space, crushing dozens of factory ships in collapsed reality bubbles. The quantum mines deployed by the Tau Ceti installation detonated in cascading chains, each explosion creating more quantum mines in a self-perpetuating wave of destruction. When it was over, the galactic rim was empty. No devourer ships, no debris, nothing but twisted space-time slowly healing itself back to normal geometry. The enemy fleet had been completely destroyed. But Webb knew better than to celebrate yet. He had read the ancient reports. The Devourers had been defeated before, only to return stronger. Long-range sensors show no additional contacts, Dr. Cathara reported, but we're detecting dimensional distortions beyond our sensor range. Something's out there, Webb nodded. The main fleet. This was just their advance force. The command center fell silent. If what they had just faced was merely an advance force, then the main Devourer fleet would be beyond comprehension. How long until they arrive? Commander Thexall asked. Webb consulted the ancient predictive models, feeling the weight of 5 million years of preparation pressing down on him. 6 months, maybe less. And when they come, they'll know exactly what we're capable of. Dr. Zephi looked at the readings from the ancient installations.
Can we stop them?
The ancient warriors couldn't, Webb replied. But they left us their knowledge, their weapons, their experience. We have advantages they didn't, such as... Webb looked around the command center at the faces of his alien colleagues. Beings from dozens of worlds, working together despite centuries of mistrust and competition. The ancient civilization had been alone in their fight. This galaxy had allies. We have time to prepare, he said. And we have something the Devourers have never faced before. A galaxy that knows they're coming. Over the next 6 months, Webb would coordinate the largest military buildup in galactic history. Every world would contribute ships, weapons, personnel. The ancient installations would be studied, reverse-engineered, improved upon. New defensive networks would be built, incorporating both ancient technology and modern innovation. The Devourers would return, stronger and more determined than before, but they would find a galaxy ready for war.